we're constantly becoming, right? We're becoming all of the time, and it's going to change for every birth. That's how we know it's a bit individualized. And what is needed for one person is not going to be needed for another person.
Hi, my name is Augustine Colebrook, and I'm the principal at Midwifery Wisdom Collective. I speak on this podcast about big picture political issues and the future of our profession.
Hey y'all, I am Jamara, and I'm a midwife. I'm also a birth justice activist, and this season I am looking forward to sharing stories of Black midwives and the communities they serve.
Hello, beloved birth community. I'm Angela Love, nurse midwife since 2004, preceptor, and mother. I have a home birth practice called Midwife Love and a national telehealth practice called Midwife RX. My mission is to keep birth choices available and to educate the next generation of midwives for our daughters and grandchildren. Matriarchy now.
I'm Layla Wyatt. I get to share with you the voices of student midwives from across the country and beyond. This season, we focus on those students who just graduated, are about to sit for the NARM, or did yesterday, and we get tips and tricks for you for what happens at the end of the student midwife journey.
Welcome to the Midwifery Wisdom Podcast, and here we go again. Today I am joined by the amazing Nicole Morales. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. Will you give us your introduction? Who are you? Where are you in the world? What are you about?
I'm in San Diego, California right now, and I'm a mother, a home birth midwife. I have a small home birth practice. I'm a breech mom, a breech advocate. I'm a midwife who's incorporating body work for fetal positioning, as well as for comfort and ease and general nervous system work with individualized care. I am a Spinning Babies approved trainer. I teach shoulder dystocia and breech, and a storytelling class about going deeper as a birth worker into the work that we do that's like metaphors for counseling. Doing some work with breech competency paperwork, so people can keep that themselves, kind of track their journeys to competency. I'm a co-author of the Breech Release, Opening Pathways for Midwifery and Prenatal Bodywork, and working on a new book too, having to do with storytelling and going back to the basics of midwifery.
Wow, this is amazing. What a variety of things you're involved in. And also it kind of all makes perfect sense. You're like creating this rich content. It's amazing. I want to start first with the bodywork piece. I love what you're doing. And I don't know who coined it, maybe Caitlin Clark up in the Bay Area, but this idea of birth biomechanics, this idea of understanding the anatomy and physiology of the pregnant body and the neonatal body so clearly that we are conversating about their relationship to each other. Do you call this birth biomechanics? Does that phrase resonate with you?
Too
patriarchal of a term.
Well, it seems very straightforward and rigid.
And it's not at all.
And it's not at all.
Yeah.
But I can also resonate with some aspects of that, because in some ways that works. And also realizing that there's this flow to it and this change to it, having to do with anatomy and physiology, and also revisioning that, because, anatomy and physiology as we've learned it, or how it's written, has a lot of opinions written across it and a lot of damage done to it throughout the years. And
true.
So yeah, it's a little more fluid than biomechanics, but yeah, I agree that that's definitely where I lean towards and how I see a lot of the work we do.
If you could give it a better or a new name, what would you give? Like what's a phrase that you would use for this? It's an interdisciplinary. It's an it's an intersection of lots of professions, really. Wouldn't you say?
I don't know. I just kind of started calling it midwifery.
That's perfect. Yeah, duh.
But, I mean,
That's perfect.
so I was first exposed to some of this work going to a midwifery conference in Oaxaca.
Yeah.
Back when I was a newer birth worker, and there's all this
Yeah.
information, this depth to
Yeah.
it. And here I am newer,
Yeah.
just skimming some things off the top
Yeah.
just by exposure. But it was this aspect of really being able to see how movement and gravity and body work all comes together. And at the time that I learned
Wait, let's
it,
just say that again. Movement and gravity and
And-
body work.
yeah.
Okay. Love it.
And I can also say physiology, right? Because the
Yeah,
nervous
yeah.
system, this is the work we do as midwives or
Yeah.
as birth workers in general, is that we commune with people's nervous systems.
Yeah.
In the ceremony of birth. Yeah. And it can be also the prenatal, or it can be, I do breech body balancing. I do a lot of breech advocacy.
Yeah.
See anywhere from 0 to 5 people a week who are presenting breech
Yeah.
at the end of pregnancy.
Amazing.
So, it's like the session with them is not just about turning the baby.
Right.
Babies have inside information, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just messengers of what their experience is inside, right? But
Ooh, that's another powerful tweetable. I'm just going to make you repeat that.
what the babies have inside information, and they're messengers from the inside. Yeah.
Ooh, they have, yeah. And then one more, which was like, they're just expressing their experience, right? Isn't that what you were saying?
Well, they are. They're telling us what the space is.
It's so
inside.
true, but it's brilliant. The space, the psychology, the nervous system, the influence, the exposure, everything. They're expressing the sum total of their environment. That's a brilliant quote.
Yeah. Well, it's also the constellation of where they are, right? And there's so many things that add to how they've found this position. I mean, even looking at like breech running down both maternal and paternal lines, which, down the paternal lines, what's that about? Legacy, working something out important that happened some other place, time. But, it's, I think in doing that work, it's that sacred space of realizing that we're working with relationship, and this baby's being cradled within a cradle, right? And how do we just see possibility, but also be able to track, that relationship, and that plays forward when, we go to birth as well, right?
It does. And I think you're in the nuance, like you said, below the surface, into the depth now as a senior midwife. And the relationship that we have with birth as midwives, the relationship that we have with ourselves, with our own births, with our own mothers, we're bringing that into every situation. And so then this is where I think your work is some of the most important work that's happening, is this idea of getting clear enough to actually help clear other things. And that's what you've done. So you were first exposed to this in Oaxaca. Tell me, like, what happened? How did it evolve from there?
Well, I mean, I have to say, I'm going to back up a little bit even before that.
Yeah.
I came in through the lens of 1990s home birth in California.
Yeah.
So, I had a pretty purist view of how birth should be and how it can play out. And in the process, watched my midwife go to prison, and during my second pregnancy. So that kind of changed also different ways I began to see birth work in general. And so just wanted to weave that in there, just because it's kind of starting there. It doesn't really start there.
Yeah.
But when I came back from Oaxaca, I was gifted a rebozo by Doña Mila down there, and someone else gave me one as well. And I assumed that I just hadn't gotten the memo about like how to use gravity and movement and the rebozo, and just started to bring it into a volunteer program I was at. I was also returned to attend midwifery school in someone's basement at the time here in San Diego, which eventually became the only accredited school in California. But so I returned with this and just began to use it how I had known or how I had learned. And I began to observe things like shifts in labor patterns, not just like, it had a bit of magic to me. It still does, right? Like you're doing something magical and it shifts things and things change. And it's not like I was really thinking about really what's happening inside. It was like, oh, I was bringing this particular gift to this moment because it was being called for, because it brought comfort, or, sometimes some would say even prayer to that moment, in the sense of, please, let's create some change.
Yeah. On your knees begging, please.
That's right. That's right.
Labor.
Yeah. So, it's that's really where things headed. And then I had I started an apprenticeship and then got distracted by having another baby. And that was my third baby, who was breech. And she's one of my biggest teachers too. She continues to be. She's pretty amazing. Still keeping her head up next to my heart. And and so, after her birth, and it was a pretty straightforward home birth. And after I finished most of my apprenticeship and was ready to, sit for my exam and start moving into my own practice, I decided to have a bigger picture of how to start looking at breech. And so started seeking out mentors and just going to like different conferences that were going on. I had missed by one day the one in Vancouver for breech, and made the next one in Washington, D.C. But in the meantime, I had ended up in Indianapolis by a workshop that Rick Fries had put on with Peter J. O'Neill and Betty Ann Davis. And what had happened before is I was searching out answers about gravity and movement to, as well as creating space to resolve breech complications. And I wasn't able to find my answers anywhere. And that was really frustrating for me. And it was at that workshop that I had seen Gail Tully before when Spinning Babies came through town. And when Spinning Babies came through town, I thought, I don't need to take Spinning Babies. I'm really good at this. But then the resolving
a lot of midwives think that, and then they attend it and they're like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah, I was like,
exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, I took
So when did you meet Gail? When did you meet Gail?
I had met her in probably 2010. But then when I was at this workshop, probably 2012, is really when I sat and talked with her. And I just accidentally ended up in her simulation line. She wasn't really teaching. She was just helping with simulations. And I began to ask these questions, and she was laying it out like, these are the things that we see normally and how and why they work within the pelvis with rotations for breech. And I was like, wow, this is what I'm looking for. So I started to write it down. So all the way home on the plane, I'm sitting with what she had told me, trying to find the right acronym to remember all this I had just learned. And that was our first connection. And really, I think the reason she eventually asked me to come on as a Spinning Babies trainer is to kind of bring in as a trainer more of those aspects of breech and shoulder dystocia, because they're so, one informs the other.
They're in reverse. That's what I always tell too. It's the same complication in reverse. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And also just like realizing that all the breech work that I'm doing is really informing me about head down babies. It just
it's so fascinating. Yeah.
It suspends us for us because we see things differently. And we see things that are different, right? Like with my hands, I learned so much more about polyhydramnios, or high levels of fluid, low levels of fluid, bicoordinate uteruses, interesting shapes of uteruses, what's cradling this baby? And you find different things that come up with breech. And so, so that's really taught me a lot about these head down babies too, right?
Yeah, it's all so fascinating. So tell me exactly, what do you do with spinning babies? You teach the workshops for people around the country. What is that like? Who are you meeting? What are you doing? Tell us more for someone who hasn't attended one.
Well, I'm not a very practical trainer because I'm still a midwife, and my heart's in midwifery. And I just taught this week. I'm teaching twice at UCST Medical Center here in San Diego, which as a home birth midwife, I never thought I'd be teaching in hospital to nurses and doctors.
Great.
But I'm good at it. I also have a birthing from within background. And so
Me too. I want to explore that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that I started birthing from within the same month I started midwifery school, and it kind of saved me from a bunch of righteous pitfalls.
Yeah.
And allowed me to develop a language of non-judgment that really resonates, I think, in a hospital setting.
Yes.
Because it's authentic and real, that I'm validating people where they're coming from. And also that I'm looking for those places where we all meet, right? We all are meeting with anatomy and physiology and better birth experience. But it also can look like teaching out of hospital to community settings, smaller groups, bigger groups. I'm just I probably teach a little bit less than a lot of the other trainers because I'm on call for births. And
what is it like teaching doctors? Like, what is that like for you?
Well, there's not that many doctors, but the doctors I have, I had some residents this week, and just really shifting it from this cervical centric question and that it's all about the cervix. And I always say we're looking at the hole instead of the hole, right? And really just you start seeing the lights go on. And I finally got a question at the end of the last workshop from a resident who was somewhat new, and she just said, so you're saying we can have a -3 station and have someone who's dilating and it's 7 and 8 centimeters, but it doesn't matter. And I said, well, it matters that the baby's -3, and we could have a 9 centimeter cervix, but the door is open, but is anybody walking through? So it feels really good to be able to kind of spiral this information systematically so that we can get into the anatomy and then into it's really all of it's storytelling, Augustine. Really, it is. It's all storytelling.
I know.
The research is storytelling.
I get into this, I'm like, we're telling story. We're humans. We're just telling stories.
They're all stories. The research is storytelling. The spinning babies is storytelling. The cervical centric story is there, and so the question is, how do we heal or change the roots of the stories so that people can begin to see something different?
Yeah. I love that. And there are so few people willing to really grapple with this reality, is that it is all storytelling. It's all fantasy. Like, all of it in some respect is fantasy. Like, it's just really, what belief system are you attached to, as whether you see what is that's not a story, that's a fact. Well, actually, I love that you see that too. I play with that all the time. And the research studies are some of the best stories, and the most made up stories in some ways, I love that.
Well, I love going to the old obstetrical textbooks too, and seeing what the storytelling is there, and what parts of those stories get pulled through to today, and which parts kind of slop up to the side. And
yes, absolutely. I was a sociology anthropology major originally, and this is my juice. I'm like, yeah, what made it through? That's fascinating. Well, so let me pull one of the stories that teases my brain a lot and see your opinion. This 1-stage versus 2-stage delivery. These are great stories that have made it through the ages. Tell me, what do you talk about? Because a lot of medical folks will be like, oh, but tell me what's kind of story refuting do you have around this whole thing?
Oh, I kind of like to teach this. I mean, I like to teach first, second, third, fourth, fifth, 110th stage, and now that I'm parenting adult kids. But I like to actually start with the first, second stage and just like, oh, what is it? How is it defined? And then slowly start pulling it apart by working into, I mean, because, as we know, first and second stage is typically retrospective anyways, but, but starting to pull it apart from the inside out, like what the experience is within someone's body and the individualization and the spectrum of how it could look. And also what's really happening in those moments, of the baby, when the baby's coming down and is received by the pelvic diaphragm, by those muscles, and how those muscles receive that baby, and the reaction within the body to maybe like push a little bit for that rotation. And then maybe there's nothing for a while. And I love to story tell that whole process, not just with the baby and its positioning of how it might or may not come down, right? But and also just starting to think about, well, if we're going to talk about early active and transition for first stage, well, what is that for second stage? What is that for third stage? And not just from like the outside in, but from the inside out of the experience. And of labor land, of that hypnotic space, of that drop within the body and with the baby as well. As Gail says, there's only room for one head in the pelvis, and it's not that person who's birthing, right? And so, I love to just make that a little bit more juicy. And of course, I'll move it into, that's one story, is the stages of labor. And then I'll move into the hormonal cycles of, and how fear gets in there. And then I'll move into the gate theory. And then I'll move into finally the storytelling of like the labyrinth and, the one path in. There's no tricks or dead ends.
It's universal. Only one way out, one way in. How does that relate to, like, say, Wapio's quantum birthing idea? Like, have you played with that at all?
I've kind of visited Wapio a little bit, but I can't talk to quantum birth idea. I do know that there's the physiological stages of labor, and I've touched upon that, and they're similar when I've looked at that.
Different storytelling. I have sometimes seen people have a schism or like a disconnect between their physiologic and their psychologic transitions of labor. Have you seen this before, where you see someone who is in transition psychologically, but their body has not caught up, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think we have these gates of terror, doubt, and unknowing that show up, not just for the people birthing, but for the midwives as well, right? And I think that's a normal thing to happen. To have those things, those schisms, as you put it, and sometimes the body just has to catch up for the rhythm to happen, right? That you're kind of caught halfway in the middle of the cycle. And your endorphins haven't quite come up. You might have fear that gets into the middle of that. I'm one of those midwives who doesn't mind talking about the elephants in the room and the fears that come up in prenatal care. And I think I scare away some of the interviews with it, because I don't have a problem talking about those things. I think actually they're doorways to deeper work that we can do, right?
And discovery.
And sometimes it happens to be in the middle of labor that we are doing this work. And we do the best we can to set up so that there's that trust there. That they know that we're going to hold that space for if there is that disjunct, or helping to and the thing is, like, at any time, one of the things I've been looking at a lot of obstetrical textbooks lately, and it's like these doorways of words appear to me in the sense of, like, incompetent cervix or posterior cervix, or the lower uterine segment is fragile and not useful or something. I don't know. They have certain words for it. And I'm like, oh, this is a doorway into some good information. That's because it's been discounted. We know that there's purpose there. And I think that even within those disjuncts, there's that purpose for an individual. And we can't always see it, but we do the best we can as midwives to help with holding that space until their body or their mind are able to align. And sometimes the disjunct is also just what they expected from Instagram, or what they expected from what position they're supposed to squat to push this baby out. But you see them and they're like trying to do these inlet positions while they're trying to squat. And I'm like, that's interesting that this is not a outlet position. They're acting like that, and some of it's up here, but then we can see that movement, and you're like, well, baby's either -3 on top of the pelvis, or there's a shoulder or a nuchal arm right there, and you can see the expectations not necessarily meeting up with what their body is telling them.
Yeah, I love that. I love Gail's quote too. I always say, you can't give birth in your head. There's no hole big enough. You have to give birth in your body, and I feel like this is a perfect example of where I see that happening. They have this preconceived notion of how it was supposed to go, and then it's not going that way, and they stay trying to birth in their head, and they have to drop down into their body. I see that a lot, and it's so frustrating as a midwife, right? Because my perspective is, my default is I always want to actually not be involved if at all possible. I don't want to lay my opinions or thoughts or judgments on top of this person. I want to just let her do her thing. But then there's these births where you see them, they're just not doing their thing. They're doing the Instagram thing, or they're doing what they read or told in childbirth, or, as beautiful as that old squatting video was, that one was really frustrating because it just showed this is the way, and it's no, there's actually no way, right? You have to find your way. So what do you do when you see someone who's obviously not not being instinctual? They are lost in their head. What do you do? Do you do anything at all?
I don't know what I do. This is where the individual relationships really come into play, is when you know someone, you can sit with them and validate them and be with them. And sometimes I don't know what they're going through or needing to go through to be able to get out of their head. And so sometimes it's about me being able to be in the mirror neurons and me being outside of my head and just being able to focus on the space, the birth space. Maybe naming what I see, asking what they're experiencing. Sometimes even just giving some suggestions, and then they can take that up or not take that up. So, I think it's honestly about honoring the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to sort of shift gears for a second and kind of talk about your future. So you've done all these incredible, I would almost call ancillary, you're filling midwifery with things that I think modern mainstream midwifery would not necessarily know to call midwifery. But it's a part of ancient midwifery, much of what you're doing, storytelling and physiology and relationship development and all of that. So where are you going next? What is your sort of vision for what you're headed towards?
I think that this sounds really big, but I think I'm really wanting to just influence the conversation and the dialogue about midwifery and what midwifery is. I'm seeing a polarization at the moment, which is really sad. And also on both sides, the nervous systems of midwifery, I feel like, is attacking and falling apart and fawning to the medical establishment. And it's like, hold on a second. Everybody can have their judgment about the other side or the other people, or how people should practice or shouldn't practice, and how they're beholden to this or not beholden to this. And in the end, how are we really showing up for people? And instead of just judging people. And so kind of like that idea that let's unite over physiology, anatomy, and caring for people's nervous systems and changing this course of midwifery. I think we're getting away from back to the basics. We're losing observational skills. We're taking on medicalized observational skills. We're getting very outcome focused, not just with the birth, but with like palpation. Like, oh, I got the LOA, I'm done. Or, it's like, oh, I'm so good. I found the cervical dilation. That's me as a student.
Yeah.
Thank you. I got it right.
Yeah.
When there's like a bigger picture here. And so also this aspect of humility is starting to disappear from midwifery. And it's like that place, like we've arrived and we've got to pretend we've arrived. And when in fact, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing half the time. It's like, we're constantly becoming, right? We're becoming all of the time. And it's going to change for every birth. That's how we know it's a bit individualized. And what is needed for one person is not going to be needed for another person. And so I really want to change that dialogue, kind of going deeper into ourselves and our own work that we need to do so that we can truly show up for other people, right? Not that I have all the answers for it, but it's like, I feel like we're losing palpation skills. We're losing the fetoscope. We're losing understanding the inside information of the baby or the messengers of the labor patterns, right? And what's being told from the inside out. It's when we're just focusing on like how dilated someone might be, right? And then
so true.
And then it's like our tools are different when we can hear differently.
Oh, so true. And the pathways in your brain are different. I mean, my God, there's so much you've just unpacked. I would say, I want to just circle back. You can see the trauma that midwives are in because you can see all of them having a trauma response, right? And I think all of this is true. Midwifery is losing a lot of these things, but like, why is where I spend a lot of my time. And just like we don't want to blame the mothers for some of the challenges that mothers are facing, the parents, I don't want to blame the midwives either. I think there's really systemic issues here at play. But like every midwife camp, as you said, like the birth keepers and the traditional midwives and the medwives and like all the different classifications. I mean, there's 5 different certifications you can get in midwifery in the US. All these camps have retreated to a familiar trauma response, right? They're either freezing or fighting or flighting or fawning, as you said. And I feel like it's indicative of this bigger problem. What in reclaiming our own power, in reclaiming our own pathway, and healing our nervous system so that we're not in a fight or flight, and we return to like rest and digest, which is really the state I think we want to be sitting at births with, or even that middle vagal experience of like both are there. We don't want to be extremes. What is your advice to newer midwives who are seeing this? They're watching and they're looking at all their preceptor midwives like in these either knocked out or hypervigilant states. What can they do? What's the first step in not losing midwifery, but also in reclaiming their own place in it all?
Well, I want to say first that I do believe that there's a legacy of trauma that's been obviously passed down, so we have a family constellation work to do with midwifery. And so part of that is also the responsibility of the preceptor to start doing their own work, right? But as far as students coming in is starting to be curious, starting to notice your senses at births, not divide the birth into these pieces, or this is the only part that's midwifery. I'm kind of frustrated with that end too, but using our senses of our hands, of our smell, of our touch, and realizing that we can build our own intuition. Like intuition's a skill. It's not a skill that a lot of people think they can teach, but we we know neurobiologically that we can teach intuition. We can go to a very simple birth and go back and live it again. And so I would also say that's the other thing is, you know, it's frustrating when you don't have a preceptor who likes to be a processor. I'm a processor.
Me
I like
too.
to go
Me
over,
too.
I like to
Yes.
go over all the nuts and bolts. What happened, you know, even with simple births, just like to go back and just see what happened. But how did we know that when we walked into the room? How did we know that things were going smoothly? What was the first thing that told us that?
Yeah.
Was there any moment that we had a different feeling, or that we might have been a little worried, or starting to notice things from the inside out? Because this is also where we can get back to bringing some of these aspects that I don't feel are valued a lot of time in midwifery, of intuition to the surface. So it's valuing waiting. It's valuing intuition as a sense, as a skill, as well as, you know, things that we feel and touch, and maybe even writing that down after birth. So I think that's, if you don't have a person to process with, then process with yourself about your memories of the birth. And I did that for years. It was very invaluable to go back and remember the births, literally remember the birth.
Yes.
So, you know, it's almost as if when you process births, it's like, okay, so I have a very small home birth practice, although I help out a lot of other people. So I go to more births than just my practice, but you know, I only go to I have like 2-3 births a month if I'm lucky. That's lucky meaning down, like 2-3 is like a lovely level. And if you process those births, it's almost like you're going to 6 or 7, because you're learning so much more to slow down and be deeper with it. Then recently I helped out with someone else's practice, and, you know, there's a lot of births in 1 week, and less time to process, you know, the difficult places, much less the easy places. The easy places were like, those are all gone, right? But it's like, and so sometimes it's almost like we get to go to more births if we stop and we be with it with quality care. Anyways.
No, I love that. It's beautiful. And every birth is a learning opportunity for those students if you allow it to be. And I think this goes back to that humility that we were first talking about. And I think it circles back to one of the real brilliance of birthing from within. And my experience was I took, Pam England was actually the midwifery partner of my aunt, who was a midwife in Colorado, New Mexico, way back in the day. But I took her first teacher training in May of 2000, really, really long time ago. And I just it's been, I've taken many other workshops from her over the years, but it's been foundational, I think, for me. And I heard you say the same thing. And I think most of us who it really resonated with have been those kind of long-term diehards. I didn't spend the money and become an educator because I was already midwife, but I've been fascinated by the shifting perspective. And if I could sum it up, it would be just basically this wonderment, being in beginner's mind every time, every breath. I wonder, I'm not sure, let's see. And that place, even as a senior midwife, to me is really worth cultivating.
I agree. And I think that sometimes as we get to know more about certain things, it's kind of like me going, I don't need to go to the Spinning Babies workshop, you know? But it's like, as you have more and more experience, I see people sometimes just try to they don't have to pay attention any longer. And I think that in a sense, it just changes our interaction with students, or our interaction with the birth, or even our presence with the person who's birthing, right? Because this person has a unique world that's unfolding, right? So yeah, I think that is part of that humility, bringing that humility to the birth.
And it's also, I mean, I also focus a lot in the nuts and bolts of midwifery practice. It's also defensive, actually. It's incredibly defensive to not have all the answers, to not be actually an authority and clear about how this will unfold. And when you use language to the client and your informed decision-making documents say, we're not sure, here's what the evidence says, here's the choices, what would you like to do? Then that birthing person retains their own authority and sovereignty over their birth process. And they're really less likely to blame and shame if things don't go the way they seem.
Yeah, there's an art of doing this work and realizing, you know, in how we do it, who is really at the center here and calling this, right? And I think that's paramount to how how I believe we should practice. And there has to be the humility there. You know, only Frodo could carry the ring.
Only Frodo could carry the ring, exactly. I almost feel like this is, like, if we boil it down, this is the dividing point between all of the challenges, I think. And this is kind of a new idea for me. So, you know, I'm just sort of using you as a sounding board. Like, what do you think? But like, whether or not you enter a birth space with this wonderment, this beginner's mind, or with authority and knowing, I think is kind of the dividing point between the different camps, the future of midwifery, the experience of the birthing person, the experience of the midwife. I think for new students or new midwives out there, this to me is one of the most important things to cultivate. And it doesn't invalidate the knowledge you do gather. Like, I've gathered a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience over the years. I know you have too. We're listening to your brilliance, but it's like, it's more about like how you wear it, right? Do I wear it like, go ahead, you're going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, there's so much wisdom with people who are new and how they can see things freshly.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And just valuing that. Yeah.
That
and then
reason.
also people who've done this a long time, they've got like these like childlike things to them too. And so it's realizing how we're a gift to each other in this birthplace. And what are we there for? We're there for this birth, for this relationship that's unfolding, I mean, I do the birthing from within thing of like, yes, it's the death of how life is. And we're part of, you know, everything is changing, and we're sitting there in the space, being honored to be there, to witness it. Right. And, and
that's
then
what
there's the time,
does.
And then there's the time that, you know, that help is needed. Right.
Well, exactly. And that's that thing that birthing from within does. And I think it's why most people are so like, about the whole process, is that it brings death into the center of the conversation. I mean, partly literally, like, we are walking a line between life and death. No birth is certain, right?
Yeah.
But also in this really sort of archetypical way of being like, the smaller side of you is dying.
Yeah.
The part that didn't know they could do this is dying. The life you had before, we're having a funeral for that. Like, that's real and center of the work. And I think a lot of people are really miffed about that. They're like, no, I can totally go back to work and breastfeed and live the life I had before, whatever.
Yeah. Well, so, there's also an overarching labyrinth journey for the birth workers, right?
Yes.
There's parts of us dying as we're learning, and there's parts of us dying as we're mentoring and on the way out, right? And we're realizing that, hey, what are we leaving behind, and how are we still invested or not invested in this work, right?
Yeah. And did I even matter? Was it even worth it? Right. I mean, we could go into the big conversation.
Or I should have just been an electrician or something, you know, those
a
moments
farmer.
where you're
I
like,
should have been a farmer. Yeah.
A waitress. I could have not done, you know,
anything else besides stay up all night with other people's poop and vomit on me. Yes. Why did I choose this profession? Well, it sure is a brilliant profession, the oldest profession. And my biggest, I mean, I'm sort of taking stock of my life in a lot of ways. And my biggest gratitude, I think, is that I got to walk shoulder to shoulder with people like you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I look back at all the mentors and, I think that that's part of the beauty is looking at the mentors who make us who we are and have influenced certain aspects of our work, and
Yeah.
just recognizing that. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure. What a gorgeous conversation. I've been waiting so long to talk to you, and I'm so glad that we did. And what a rich and beautiful conversation. Tell people how they can follow you, how they can catch up with you. How do they take a class from you?
You can follow me I'm actually on Instagram now. My students convinced me to get on there.
Yes.
And you can follow me. I don't even know what my handle is. Nicole Morales
Nicole
Midwife.
Morales Midwife. Yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
And then
we'll link that below.
Yeah, you can also, I'm on Facebook, and I have a blog I sometimes write on Art of Opening Midwifery. And
Cool.
I have a lot of musings on there over all of these different topics. And I'm going to announce some spinning babies, shoulder dystocia, and like 3-day workshop and breech basics up in LA in mid-April here soon, as well as maybe in New Mexico. So
Awesome.
That's about it.
Well, we hope you'll reserve a spot for Midwifery Wisdom in 2023 and be in touch with you about that. Just to follow up for folks who are listening, the conference, the 2022 conference, is happening in November in Galveston, Texas. You can sign up on our website, midwiferywisdom.com, and we have a streaming option if you can't show up in person. That's all on the website. And then we have a brand new download, and I was thinking you might love to hear about this too. I do feel like you can teach intuition, and we've created a 10-minute audio and companion downloadable for calibrating your intuition for midwives and birth workers. So we have that free on our website now, midwiferywisdom.com. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Augustine, for having me.
It's a pleasure.